On tomorrow with Tom Snyder next.
Good morning, everybody. We conclude our encore presentations for this vacation week for the Tomorrow Show staff, the People team that turns out giant program after giant program. And what a show we have tonight. Not here, but as soon as we finish. Seriously, we have a great show tonight that looks back to the golden days of Star Trek. To this very day, there are hundreds of thousands of people across the country who are not ashamed to call themselves Trekkies, and they actually go to conventions and swap Star Trek memorabilia and stories. And tonight we'll have with us a gentleman who runs some of the Star Trek conventions, Mr. Al Schuster. We'll have Harlan Ellison, who wrote a number of episodes for Star Trek, including some of the best of all time, so say the fans of the original program. Jim Doohan, who was Chief Engineer Scotty on the Starship Enterprise, and DeForest Kelley, who was Dr. Bones McCoy, another member of the original cast. Curiously enough, as this program was waning in popularity, it was canceled by NBC back in the 1960s, but now the reruns of the program on independent stations across the land and around the world are as popular, and in some cases more popular, than they have ever been before. Back with a look at Star Trek after these announcements, and I hope you'll stay with us.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
Let me introduce to you now 3 members of the original Star Trek as it appeared on television here on NBC, starting with Mr. DeForest Kelley, who I'm certain you'll recognize as Dr. Bones McCoy. He played the part of Bones McCoy in Star Trek. As such, he was one of the leading characters in this series. He remains today as one of the leading figures among what are called the Trekkies. These are the people that follow the cult of Star Trek. Mr. James Doohan, who was Scotty. Now, here was the man who was the Lieutenant Commander.
Chief Engineer.
Chief Engineer. The other night I said the pilot, which was wrong. The man, I was corrected, believe me, by a lot of people. The Chief Engineer on board the Starship Enterprise, and this man was responsible for making certain that the Enterprise could hit the speed of light times 400 or some such figure.
That's about it when you get right down to warp 5 or 6. But
you have to explain all these warps to me as we go along. And Mr. Walter Koenig, who was known on the series as Chekhov, he was the last member of the cast to be added. He appeared in the series for 2 years, 1967, 1968. Presently, he is a writer. He directs plays and teaches dramatics at the University of California in Los Angeles, UCLA. DeForest, James, and Mr. Koenig, Walter, welcome here. And I didn't say, but I will now, that Gene Roddenberry, who was the creator of Star Trek, had planned to be here tonight, but Gene's got a little case of the flu, and he's at home out in Los Angeles, and I wish he were here. He would like to be here, and I wanted to ask him, as I'll ask all of you, how did this thing get started?
You're speaking of the fan cult?
Not the fan cult.
Phenomenon?
Just the show itself. When Star Trek was starting, how did you all get on board the Enterprise?
Well, mine was kind of, I always say I came in the back door. I was not in, there were 2 pilots made, and I was not in either pilot. Roddenberry wanted me, but evidently someone at the network didn't want me. You know how that is.
Oh, yes.
And he kept trying for me, and after he had made the 2nd pilot, he put me on a show called Police Story. And on these reactions where they send the film out for the public to look at, I got lucky and got a kind of a high rating on that sort of thing, and they decided at the last minute to put me in to Star Trek as a doctor. So I started with the series, but I was not in either pilot.
And for myself, I was called one day to read for Star Trek, and because I do a lot of accents, they said, please do a lot of accents. So I read the same lines, about 5 or 6 lines, and I did about 5 different accents, and they picked the Scottish.
You do accents, right.
Yeah, so they picked the Scottish, and of course I was delighted with that, because I think that the tradition of an engineer is a Scotsman, you know, because all the great motor ships and the steamships of the world were built in the Clyde. So we just had to have a Scottish engineer aboard that, you know. But 300 years from now, of course, you had to go back and learn the Scottish accent all over again because everybody's conversation was exactly the same, and everybody was so boring because of the great communication. Everybody talked the same. So we had to go back, and even Uhura had to learn to speak Swahili. You understand?
Yes. Now, you were the Russian. And that came later, as I said in introducing you, the last 2 years. How come?
Well, let me say first of all that if Dee came in the back door, I came in the trap door. It was a very fortuitous circumstance where several of the people involved in the production of the show, casting director, and producer, had used me before. I had worked for them in other vehicles. And I was asked to come in and read for a part that had not yet been written. And it was a show called The Cat's Paw, and the character's name was Blake or Smith or Epstein or something like that. In any event, it was a very dramatic moment, a very dramatic scene where I was supposed to say, Captain, the ship is about to blow up, what are we going to do? And I read that with all of that emotion, you know, and all those years of training, experience, my little theater experience, my off-Broadway. And they said, well, that's terrific. But they all kind of looked at their toes, and they finally said, but can you make it funny?
And if you'd have done 20 one-liners that were dynamite, they would have said, hey, would you make it not quite so funny, please?
Right.
Exactly.
A little test of versatility there.
You've been around quite a long while, Tom. You know all the ins and outs of this business. It's a funny thing about auditions. You have to be better for auditions than you ever have to be once you're hired. That is the most critical thing in the world, is getting the job.
Right.
Now, in the little film we played here at the beginning where it said the mission is 5 years to go around the universe, etc., 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 the show did not last 5 years, did it? It lasted, what, 3?
3 years, 79 performances, which includes pilots, and also the making of a two-parter, which included the very first pilot, and they wrote a story around it to make a two-parter, and the only two-parter we had, and that was called The Menagerie, and it included the first pilot, which was called The Cage, and the second pilot was called Where No Man Has Ever Gone Before. For actors, was this a good show to work, even though it did not last?
It was a marvelous show.
As long as you wanted it to?
It offered a challenge with each script. It was not unlike, you know, when you go in and do a Western, you have a pretty good idea what you're going to do. But with Star Trek, each script was a challenge. And we could go into almost any different direction. For instance, we did a show called The Deadly Years, which enabled me to age to around 115, 125 years old, which was a real kick for an actor. I spent 5 hours each day in makeup alone for this. Now, you would never get that opportunity anyplace else to do that sort of thing, to be called upon to do that sort of thing. I found it a challenging and interesting show to do.
I thought it was what was particularly challenging about Star Trek for me was trying to make Warp 4, Captain, into something really exciting, because that's what I had to say most of the time.
Yes. What for, Captain?
No, Warp 4. Gee.
Warp 4. Warp 4. Tell me about the warps and all that. I must confess to you, I don't understand. I know that
warp 1 is the speed of light.
Okay, but I know that there are people who get this down to the details. They have blueprints of the starship, and they check the technology and everything else. I'm not into it in that fashion, so you'll have to...
Of course, I started the whole thing.
That makes two of us.
Being the chief engineer, and I built the ship up in space, so at the San Francisco Navy Yards, and they shot it up into space. What about this thing back here? Is this pretty... No, that isn't close at all, for heaven's sake. Well, that's not bad. It's not bad, though. You know, pretty good. But, see, we have 1776 on there. Isn't that great? I must say I'm observant.
Because I thought it was 1976.
1701
I looked at it.
Yeah, it should be 1976.
That's where Scott is located, in that lower compartment there. That's the engine room. And that with the bridge is in the center on top, and then the surrounding area are the science labs and quarters.
And the matter antimatter pods.
And yes, and the pod.
On the outside.
And it took a crew of 450 people, roughly, to operate this.
Yeah. It was about 400,000 tons as it was.
But what was the total people, roughly,
to operate this?
Yeah. It was about 400,000 tons as it was.
But what was the total cast of the show?
The total cast of the show, as far as the regulars are concerned, I think was 8.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? And,
which means that there were 442 people that we never saw.
They were down in steerage.
Now, you saw them, but they generally died every week. Those people we killed off.
To what do you attribute now the fact? The thing has not been on the network since 1969?
Yeah.
Right.
And you all do these conventions that we'll speak about a little bit later on. What has kept this popularity alive?
Well, Tom, all you have to do, to me, is to look at a show today. And we can look at them. Some shows I have not seen for 9 years. And you just look at them and you say, man, that was a great show. And not just because you were part of the cast, but because the whole story holds up. The stories had such fantastic content to them.
Good writing?
Absolutely beautiful writing. The whole concept from the start that Gene Roddenberry had, so that he could be able to say something for today, but put it 300 years from now and it wouldn't be censored. You understand? It was really a beautiful thing that you could now look at it and still say to yourself, wow, what a great show, because it had something for every age.
Does the fact that you were Scotty, the engineer of the Starship Enterprise, has that in any way gotten in your way in continuing your career as an actor?
Oh, yes, there's no doubt about it, because I have had producers that I have had worked for before Star Trek, and they'll say to my agent now, well, you know, but I don't want a Scotsman. And I worked for them doing maybe a German or a Frenchman or a Lancashire Englishman or a Welshman or an Irishman. And they say, I don't want a Scotsman, because you become typed. And there's no way that you don't. But I think the whole thing is helping to pay off now by the very fact that we're going to be doing a feature motion picture. You know, and I think that what will probably happen is that they will have another feature motion picture after that, and another one after that. As long as they keep the quality up,
and
then I'm sure we'll all be happy to do it.
And the original cast. Hopefully.
The fans really insist on that.
I would think so.
That's one of the parts of the fact that it is such a great show, is that we were lucky in the casting. You'd be surprised. You know, I have a friend of mine who's a dentist who used to work on the MGM lot, and he fixes the teeth of all the big stars, and he says everything depends on luck in this business. And for 35 years, his anniversary, his name is Charles Cavalieri, and his anniversary of 35th anniversary is this coming Thursday, the 5th of February, and he says it's no way that it isn't luck. He said, you have to have the talent, but he says it's luck that gets you really there.
And you lucked in getting all the cast members.
I think everybody lucked in.
To grow together as a real crew on a real starship,
Absolutely.
Which gave something of that reality when the thing was on television. We are blessed by, is it Paramount Pictures, I guess, that's given us permission to show some of the film, and we will do that after these announcements, and I hope all of you will stay with us. John just said one of the questions they're asked a lot is, how come there weren't any bathrooms on the Starship Enterprise? Because they have the blueprints. Give the answers.
You want me to answer that?
Oh, well, nobody ever goes to the bathroom on television. In any show that's ever been done, nobody ever goes to the bathroom.
Well,
this is
you
not
see,
done.
On the Spaceship Enterprise, it was very easy because we did have phasers. And then you set them on disintegrate.
Yes. Aim carefully.
And and aim carefully. And we only had a few losses of personnel in training camp. That's the way it's done.
We aim to please, so please aim. Now, again, thanks to Paramount Pictures for helping us out. We have a portion of an episode called The Omega Glory, which ran during the second season, I believe, here on NBC. And here is how it was and how it still is.
Planet Omega-4, sir. Object ahead. Another vessel in planet orbit, Captain.
Oh, wait a minute. What happened when they boarded and investigated?
Something happened. Something went wrong there.
It's funny. You watched 3-4 minutes of this, or what do we have, 2 minutes here, and I didn't want it to end all.
And so I wanted to tell you something, Tom. We were talking about the quality of this show a few minutes ago. It seems, too, that it had a certain magic about it that touched the hearts and the minds of the young people and people of all ages, that seemed to prod their minds to want to inquire further into the universe and science and philosophies and cultures. And this has reflected throughout all the universities in the United States. You know, kids are doing theses on Star Trek and that sort of thing. And to give you an example, while we were doing Star Trek, a thing that stands out in my mind particularly, a man brought his daughter to the set who was 15 years old, a deeply retarded child. And we occupied 2 sound stages. He didn't bring her directly onto the sound stage because she was tremendously excited about being there. And he explained to me that this girl had not uttered a sound in 15 years. And quite by accident, they flicked on Star Trek. And she began to make noises. And the father became very excited about it. Took her to a therapist. And she began to talk. So now, whatever it was that touched this child's mind is a very satisfying and worthwhile feeling. And our mail reflects that in all categories. People on the verge of suicide, I've received mail that have looked at this show, and their whole attitude about life seems to have changed.
Have any of you found that the overriding philosophies as expressed by the writing and the craftsmanship in Star Trek itself has become a great part of your own personal philosophy of life?
Well,
universality.
Well, I would hope that going in, whatever philosophies I might entertain or I might live by were relatively fixated, relatively a part of me before the show began. I wouldn't like to think that I was proselytized by a television series. I would hope that I have enough intellectual resource to have already formulated those kinds of philosophies for myself. I must say they are compatible with what I believe, very, very much so.
But did this show touch you in any way other than professionally?
I'll tell you how it touched me, and I think this is kind of insightful, if you'll bear with me a minute. The most extraordinary thing about the show for me is really the kind of ironic counterpoint that it has made in terms of my life pattern now and my lifestyle now. Here I am. I go to these Star Trek conventions, as we all do, and I'm quick to say that if it had been any other actor playing the same role, the same thing would have happened to them. But the adulation, the attention, the press, all of the positive things really do not reflect in any way my standing in the theatrical community. It is not for me, it is not as easy for me to accept this kind of attention, knowing that at the same time I have to produce 2 ID cards to cash my, to get my groceries in Los Angeles. I'm saying that figuratively, but that to me is the most astounding thing, that the Star Trek phenomenon is the science fiction of my life, because it has nothing to do with my position in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, with my career, anything like that. It's totally, if anything, it's diametrically opposed to where I am.
There's another interesting aspect to it.